it seems to be growing so much. Like they have Messi going over now, but it's also growing quite a lot in Saudi Arabia as well. Of course, there's all these big controversial transfers recently. Ronaldo kind of started a movement. You got Jordan Henderson has just recently confirmed a move. Do you see Saudi Arabia growing as much? Like, how much do you see the actual future of it? Do you think it's something that could actually pick up quite a lot?
Well, I mean, the impact's enormous, and the financial clout of the country and the way they've done it in such a coordinated way in a short period of time. It's caught everyone by surprise, I think. And the market, if you call it that, has to react. So it either has to compete or it has to settle down at some point. And I think that for me, what I've said, the whole conversation we've had so far is about sustainability. To build something that's sustainable is the only way of ensuring sort of riding through the ups and downs of it and ultimately succeeding. I think, they've come in and they're a massive disruptor, because as I said, they've created a market that people weren't really aware of and quite frankly can't compete with the numbers that they're sort of, that are being touted around. I think it's really important not to blame individual players as well. I would always be concerned that the player is driving the move, not the agent or the club, another club. I think there's a lot of work to be done around the transparency around some of these moves, because, these Saudi clubs, PIF, the investment fund, they've got links with other European clubs. And so some of these transfers potentially could be seen as sort of moving from Club A to Club B with a common link in between, which is the Saudi investment fund. So I think there's going to be some work to be done around that transparency. Can it establish itself as a league? Maybe, but without the other pillars to that development strategy, I don't think top down works. The US tried it for many years, didn't they? With likes of Pele and George Best went out in the 70s, big stars, as big as Messi and Ronaldo going out there, but because there was nothing that underpinned it, it was just superficial and just blew over in quite a quick time. So I suppose, without knowing what the motivation is for Saudi Arabia in terms of what their ambitions are around having a serious league and developing their football, it remains to be seen. But certainly it's caused a massive stir in European and world football, because suddenly players and the inflation around players' salaries and transfers, or particularly salaries, is just, it's just not just one level. It's 5-10 times what people would expect to get paid.
Yeah, it's super interesting. You talk about the Saudi link. I guess I didn't even really think about that, but there's so much investment in European football even there, and I guess that does take away the responsibility for those players a bit. But I don't know what you think, because most of the criticism online really has been directed to those players. So, like, for example, with Jordan Henderson, I just mentioned, he was like wearing the Pride armband quite recently, and then now he's going to Saudi Arabia. Do you think there is any element of culpability there, or it's a huge amount of money?
I think it's easy to it's very easy to draw a line of contradiction, of course, and very easy to accuse someone of hypocrisy and what have you. For me, it is difficult, because ultimately, if we were to pull back the curtain on a lot of investments in this country, if we were to look at our foreign trade, arms trade deals, military links, politics, I think when you start scratching the surface, we would all feel compromised quite quickly. Now, that doesn't mean that, you shouldn't stand up for what you believe in. And if you believe in something enough, then of course that would always come between you and a financial decision, if you can afford to make that financial decision. But I don't think it's fair to criticize somebody for all the good they've done because of the fact that they've done something that's perceived as contradictory. I think you have to look at, is there any good that can come from that person's involvement? So if we're talking about Jordan Henderson, what good can he do, and how can he improve the dialogue, shall we say, between those people that are upset with him and his new employers? And that's a challenge. I think it's very easy for us to sit here on our moral high ground and say, well, I wouldn't do that. But, if you're put in that situation, depending on your circumstances, maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't. And I do find it a challenge, but it's going to be one that keeps coming back, because we have a standard of accountability. In theory, I don't know if we do so much at the moment with the government we've got in charge. But we've set very high standards in many ways over decades, and we've always worked hard to defend human rights and the way we treat people and equality, and of course that's vital for us to do that. But it's also important that we help people and other countries along that journey. I think that is something that is a challenge. And it's, for me, it's something I have to think about when I go and work in countries or work in certain places. Do I take the work because I think I can make a difference, or do I boycott? When I was growing up, there was a big boycott in South Africa because of apartheid. But that was a global boycott and companies were blacklisted. Sports people weren't allowed to travel there. I raised money for the ANC. They were considered a terrorist organisation at the time, but they were freedom fighters. So everyone's perception's different, and I think that you can work together to create an outcome that you want, rather than necessarily having to sign up to the same terms of engagement. So let's see how it plays out.
Yeah, I suppose it's similar to this debate with Qatar, because some people argue we're bringing maybe more progressive ideas to the country. Then others say it's a step backwards. We're doing so much with women's football, bringing it to the forefront, and even with reducing homophobia, for example. I'm sure that you have that first-hand experience with homophobic abuse hurled at you. And some people say that now having this focus put on Saudi Arabia, where arguably human rights are far less perhaps less in the forefront and perhaps less controlled, that it is a step backwards for football.
Yeah, and again, that's the debate. And for me, it was like the Qatar World Cup. That shouldn't be down to players defending or boycotting that tournament. That's governing body stuff. They have to set the standards. So whether it's FIFA, UEFA, La Liga in Spain, Bundesliga, Premier League, whoever, they have to set the standards, and the players shouldn't be put in a position, I don't think, where they're exposed to some of these very complicated, very sensitive discussions. Obviously, players going to Saudi Arabia to play, that's their individual choice. But if we were saying to any country, you can only play in our competitions if you meet these standards, human rights standards, equality standards. Once you meet those standards, you can enter our competitions. That would take the whole discussion off the table. And that's leadership. That's what it requires. The players often find, and I felt particularly sorry for them during the Qatar World Cup, because ultimately, people were put in very, very difficult positions without any real knowledge or tools to know how to handle those complicated issues. We're talking about it now, and we're dancing around bits of it, of the conversation, because it's complex. So for me, there's a whole piece of work to do about what football expects of a participant within football. We've got very clear guidelines in England, what's expected. And, they'll get challenged, those guidelines, every so often. Black Lives Matters, when that came up, that was a big challenge for the governing bodies, whether it was the Premier League or the FA. I mean, even players wearing a poppy was challenged because it was seen as a political symbol because of the Second World War, and that was a challenge by FIFA because it didn't meet their sort of guidelines on wearing political symbols. So it's not easy, and there's going to be more and more complications, I think. So it's increasingly important and incumbent on governing bodies to get their house in order. But don't ask me how much confidence I have in FIFA, because the answer would be not a huge amount. Again, in the current showing.